Buy Bryce Young and Justin Fields now before their dynasty value goes up. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to tell you about 6 players that you should be buying in your dynasty leagues before they see a massive increase in value this offseason. And Kate, let's start at the quarterback position. Which quarterbacks are you targeting in dynasty leagues this offseason?
We can't have this conversation without starting off with young up-and-comer Bryce Young, who had probably one of the biggest bounce backs that we've seen all season long. In terms of, like, when you look from start to finish, the transformation, he looks like an entirely different football player. And not just in terms of, like, his confidence, his play style even. The use of his legs in the back half of the season, it feels like there was almost like a light bulb that went off, because I've always thought that, Bryce Young had enough athleticism, enough mobility to, like, he had legs. It was just a matter of kind of that wasn't a part of his game. After exceeding 10 rushing yards just once over the first 6 starts for Bryce Young, we actually saw him kind of start steamrolling it. It had just a single game in the back half of the season with fewer than 10 rushing yards. And we saw his ability to make plays in terms of rushing touchdown production. And we know that that is a big cheat code for, any sort of quarterback in terms of his fantasy ceiling. I love the fact that he's attached to Dave Canales. I think that this is generally a situation that, like, man, we looked at this production here when, there wasn't much to like about the receiving core, etc. I have to imagine there are going to be some changes that will benefit Bryce Young in a big way this offseason.
Yeah, 5 rushing touchdowns since he came back from being benched. There was just a lot of these games, Kate, that I, for whatever reason, I got to catch and watch live. Like the Kansas City game. He was the best quarterback on the field that day. I mean, he was unbelievable in the Kansas City game. The next week they played Tampa Bay. He took them to overtime. They should have won that game. Chuba Hubbard fumbled the ball. Otherwise, they beat Tampa Bay. The next week they played Philadelphia. Philadelphia, best defense in the league. And he played really well in that game. He should have thrown another touchdown late. The ball went right through Xavier Legette's hands, and they lose by, I think, 6 points. They beat Arizona in a game where he scores 3 touchdowns. They beat Atlanta in a game where he scores 5 touchdowns. I don't think he is going to be a QB1 in your dynasty leagues, but I do think he's a high upside QB2. And I just think this offense with Dave Canales, I think they're going to get better receivers this offseason. He was throwing to Adam Thielen and Tommy Tremble and Jalen Coker down the stretch. Like, I got to believe that they're going to be invested in the wide receiver market. I believe in Bryce Young. I want to buy him.
Yeah, let's talk about his fantasy finishes here. Week 12 on. These are his weekly fantasy finishes at the quarterback position. QB 14, QB 7, QB 20, QB 12, QB2, QB 19, and QB1 in week 18. Obviously, plenty of starters out in week 18, so that one has a bit of an asterisk. But I think the rushing upside that we've seen does make him a pretty high floor QB2 if they're going to especially make investments in the passing game here. I love the coaching staff. I trust this offense. And I do think that his benching has made a big difference in terms of just his overall confidence and mental processing to the point where, yeah, we should be in.
Now, we don't have a ton of Bryce Young trades, partly because his emergence kind of happened during the fantasy football playoffs, and a lot of leagues just don't allow trades in fantasy playoffs, but
which you should.
I agree. One trade here, like in a super flex league, teammate for teammate, Bryce Young for Chuba Hubbard.
You said super flex?
Super flex, yeah.
If I need a quarterback, I think that's a very fair trade.
I think it's fair as well. That obviously depends on roster construction, but I don't think you need to give up a ton to go get Bryce Young. But I think we saw enough last year or this year to think that he's going to be pretty comfortably a decent starter for at least the next couple of years. So I'm buying there. The other one that I wanted to mention, this is a Steeler fan, is Justin Fields. We don't know if Justin Fields is going to be the starter in 2025 for the Steelers. But one of the reasons why I am comfortable buying him is that there are so many teams that have quarterback needs right now that I've got to imagine that he's going to be a starter somewhere, and a starting quarterback with his athleticism is always going to be appealing.
Yeah, and I don't think we saw the best of Justin Fields this offseason either, or this season in general. Even when he was the starter, didn't see a ton of fantasy relevance, and I think they're just trying to play it really, really safe in terms of his playmaking, right? I think they kind of took the playbook. I think they dialed it back a bit for Justin Fields. I think they were just kind of trying to protect the ball. And that's totally fair. I do think that Fields's dynasty value will probably hinge on whether I'm less interested, to be honest, if he's staying in Pittsburgh based
100%.
on the way we saw them execute the offense with him behind center. But I do think that there's no doubt that he's got insane mobility that's going to be, I think, a big asset if there's a team willing to let him use it.
So let's play a little game for a second, Kate, because I think you and I, if we had to pick right now, we think we're probably leading towards Russell Wilson being the starter in Pittsburgh in 2025. And by most accounts, there's only 2 quarterbacks in this class that are going to get drafted in the first round. So let's do this. Let's assume the Titans and the Browns draft quarterbacks at 1 and 2. And let's assume that Russell stays in Pittsburgh and Sam Darnold stays with the Vikings. Okay. That leaves teams like the Giants, who need a quarterback, the Raiders, who need a quarterback, the Jets, the Saints. I think the Colts are certainly into that conversation. Maybe Seattle makes a move. There are going to be at least 5 to 6 teams that aren't going to be able to draft a quarterback and that aren't going to be in the market for Russell Wilson or Sam Darnold, that might just feel like, hey, we know Justin Fields isn't the best option, but he can be a stopgap, a bridge for us. And if that's the case, we're going to be ranking Justin Fields as like a top 16 option every single week. And now you don't even have to you don't have to buy him anywhere close to that value right now.
Yeah. And, a lot of the locations that you mentioned, not super enticing, in terms of their overall upside. But then, kind of once you take a look at the roster and the playmakers on the roster, like the Las Vegas Raiders, for example, an organization that it's been a mess. But I do think, generally speaking, when you're looking at personnel, you've got Brock Bowers, you've got Jacoby Myers, who I think is an incredibly underrated wide receiver. Michael Mayer, I actually think the playmakers in that receiving core, ignoring the running back position, are pretty dang solid. So you get a quarterback capable of delivering them a football, and suddenly I think the Raiders offense looks a lot more appealing than you maybe would have guessed. Even, a team like the New York Giants, for example, we've seen, Brian Daboll be able to scheme up plays that emphasize Daniel Jones's rushing ability. And that did become kind of a hinge of his game prior to his torn ACL. We saw things were it wasn't as bad as it always had seemed. Once they kind of unlocked that, you have Malik Neighbors. It's not all bad.
somebody's going to talk themselves into Justin Fields. And frankly, I won't be surprised if it's Pittsburgh because they're going to want to go with somebody younger. I don't think Russell Wilson at age 37 is going to suddenly get a lot better. Somebody's going to talk themselves into Russell Wilson, and that's going to be really intriguing for us from a fantasy perspective. Okay, let's talk about some running backs that we are buying into this offseason, including Tank Bigsby, who we will get to next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That is $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is so easy to navigate, and there's a variety of bets that keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some more excitement and drama to the playoffs. FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing 6 players that we are buying in our Dynasty leagues before their value increases. And Kate, let's talk about Tank Bigsby, the third-year running back now for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Why are you buying him?
I think we just have to look toward the future here of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, Travis Etienne still a fixture in that offense, but I do think that there's no doubt that Tank Bigsby looked like the better overall running back this year. Like, is there anything in your mind? I know there was a lot of, I think, hope in terms of his prospects as a rookie. That quickly just kind of fell to the wayside, but 2023 third round pick, 91st percentile per PFF stable metrics in terms of missed forced tackle rate on rush attempts, 95th percentile in terms of yards after contact per attempt. That ranked third among 55 qualifying running backs. And I don't think he was doing, he was doing a lot with very little. Ranked 47th out of 55 qualifying running backs in terms of yards before contact behind the large line of scrimmage. Like he was doing a lot with very little help from that offensive line. I just think, like, when you look at the overall situation, when you look at, I think, the lack of production that we've seen from Travis Etienne, who's been, I mean, just probably one of the biggest flops in terms of what we thought we were going to get out of a first round pick versus the efficiency we've seen on the field. Like, Tank Bigsby, I think, offers this team a lot more juice than we've gotten to this point from Travis Etienne.
I wouldn't be surprised if Travis Etienne is a surprise cut or trade this offseason. He didn't look good really at any point this year. He's got a fairly big cap number. I do think maybe his change of scenery would be good for him. I also just think no matter who ends up being the Jacksonville head coach, is going to provide some more juice and energy. And it seems like, just based on their interviews, they're leaning towards an offensive-minded coach. And I think Bigsby is a really good option here if you want to buy low on a running back. We talked about, I think, a week ago on some offenses that we wanted to buy into this offseason because we think they're going to get better, whether it's through the quarterback play or through coaching, coaching improvements. I think Bigsby in Jacksonville certainly fit those qualifiers. Bigsby is somebody that I would love to target as a low-end RB2.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of upside here potentially to be had, especially if they figure out the coaching situation and if they can get kind of hit the reset button in that regard. If we can get Trevor Lawrence up to form, like, I do think this offense has a lot of different pieces to like, and that's going to extend to the run here. Again, you mentioned, the possibility of this team moving on from Travis Etienne. They did pick up his 5th-year option, but
it's very tradable. Very tradable.
Yeah. And I think there are going to be teams that are maybe more competitive that are going to see that cap hit. They're going to be fine with it because, think of teams like the Vikings, for instance, who are super close to contending this year. Aaron Jones going to be a free agent. Like I think there's going to be some opportunities there.
The Raiders have a bunch of cap space, right? And maybe they don't want to spend their first or second round pick on a running back, but adding somebody like Travis Etienne just gives them an actual NFL running back that can play all 3 downs. Just one of several examples.
Yep, for sure. And I think, again, like you said, one of several examples. We talked, I think, last week's show about the number of teams that are just kind of entirely setting the reset, or entirely resetting the running back room in their respective markets this year. It's several teams in contention there. How about Jaylen Warren, restricted free agent here? We think he's going to remain with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee Harris, a free agent. The team declined his 5th-year option. It feels like they could make this his backfield. Do you think Pittsburgh really hands him the keys?
It seems like Najee can't wait to get out of Pittsburgh. So first of all, I don't think he's going to be back. He over the last couple of years, he said some things that have made me like raise my eyebrows. I don't think there was a point in the Ravens game where he had 2 awesome runs, like 2 really, really good runs. And it was 3rd and inches and they took him off the field. And he kind of went over to like Mike Tomlin and it's like, hey, dude, what are we doing? And of course, Pittsburgh didn't get to 3rd and short. Then they punt it. So I think Najee's out. I think Najee wants to go somewhere else. Jaylen Warren, you mentioned he's a restricted free agent. Pittsburgh can bring him back for about $4 million on the 2nd round tender. I think they do that. That's not that big of a deal. And the only other running backs on this roster are Cordero Patterson, who signed a 1-year deal. So he's a free agent. And that's just about it, Kate. Like there's just not a lot in this backfield. Pittsburgh's got a lot of needs on both sides of the ball. I don't envision them using maybe their 1st or 2nd round pick on a running back. It feels like this is Jaylen Warren's backfield in 2025. And again, assuming Arthur Smith is back, we know they want to run the football. I think Jaylen Warren, who is being valued as RB 36 right now, is a value.
Yeah, and we've seen this kind of time and time again with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Whenever there is a kind of new top dog in town, we've seen that, the lead running back role for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if they are a player that has the trust of the offense, we know Pittsburgh's primary goal is always going to be to run the football. Yes. As long as Mike Tomlin is the head coach, that is their goal. So I really think that there's a big opportunity for Jaylen Warren if they hand him the keys to the offense, for sure.
I just think I think he's a good player. Now, I think he also got banged up early in the year, and I think it might have affected him all year. But we know he's a capable receiver. Pittsburgh's going to bring somebody else in. This isn't going to be only Jaylen Warren's backfield. But, Kate, if it's a 3rd round pick in Jaylen Warren, we know how much Mike Tomlin doesn't really like playing rookies. It just feels like this could be a huge opportunity for Jaylen Warren to average, 17, 18 touches a game. And behind a young offensive line that does have some talent, I'm in on that.
For sure. I think there's a lot to like here. Now, I also think looking at, the strength of this incoming draft class at maybe we see some shakeups there as well, but definitely going to be an offseason watch.
And again, if Justin Fields is the quarterback for the Steelers, I'm loving this even more, right? Because we know how much a mobile quarterback can help a running back. Look no further than what Lamar Jackson is doing with Derrick Henry or what Jalen Hurts is doing for Saquon Barkley. So again, that's another reason if Justin Fields ends up being the quarterback in Pittsburgh, I'm all in on Jaylen Warren, who we expect to be back. Let's talk about some receivers that we are buying this offseason that could see their value increase. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or maybe that you were paying for twice? It definitely happened to me. My wife and I actually were paying for the same subscription twice. She was paying for it. I was paying for it. We had some other ones that I didn't even realize were happening, but Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It'll help you monitor your spending, and it'll help you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kay, let's talk some receivers. Which receivers are you buying this offseason who could have a massive increase in value?
Let's talk about Tee Higgins, who is a player who, I think we're assuming will come back and play for the Cincinnati Bengals. And guess what? We saw just how insane and how high the ceiling is when he's with Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow was playing at an MVP level all season. He would have been, I think, a much bigger part of that MVP conversation if it weren't for the fact that the Bengals didn't make the playoffs. Tee Higgins ranked as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game and half PPR scoring formats this year. Obviously, health has kind of been an issue on and off for Tee Higgins, but I do think, generally speaking, we saw the ceiling, and this year we were reminded of that. We talk about recency bias. Tee Higgins is a guy that won a lot of fantasy football championships, was the overall wide receiver 1 in championship week, 34.6 fantasy points in week 17. I think if he stays with the Bengals, great. He'll be tied to a really good quarterback. If he goes elsewhere, guess what? He's top dog, assuming, and he's probably going to get that wide receiver 1 target share that we've kind of always wanted for Tee Higgins. So,
and that's the
win-win.
point. Like the floor is so high here. Okay, worst case scenario, he re-signs with the Bengals and he's playing as a wide receiver 2 with Joe Burrow. Big deal. We've seen him produce wide receiver 1 numbers there, but there's also a chance that he could land somewhere else in free agency and be the clear-cut wide receiver 1 and earn a bunch of targets. And I think if you're concerned about Tee Higgins going to play with a quarterback that's worse than Joe Burrow, that's probably fair. There's very few situations out there where he's going to go and play with a quarterback better than Joe Burrow. But Kate, I also don't see Tee Higgins leaving a top 5 quarterback, a top 4 quarterback to go play with the 28th quarterback. I think he's going to be picky here if he hits free agency. So the trade-off of going from, let's say, quarterback 4 to quarterback 11 might be worth it if you're getting 40 extra targets every single season.
Yeah, I think that's going to balance it out. And again, he stays in Cincinnati. Great. We know Joe Burrow can support 2 wide receivers. Now, maybe we don't need the passing volume if we see some improvements on the defense, but I don't think it matters. Joe Burrow is just a really good quarterback. I don't really think there's a bad set of circumstances that Tee Higgins is going to put himself in on the free agent market here. I think he's going to play the field well. And I think regardless of how he plays the field, we're probably going to see some big time receiver production. Now, of course, the annoying thing about Tee Higgins in general has been the lack of health. He's had a ton of hamstring issues. He gets banged up a lot, but this postseason run here in the fantasy playoffs was a great reminder of how high the ceiling is. And sometimes you've got to overlook, that general question mark of health when the ceiling is as high as it can be for Tee Higgins.
So really quickly, I think if you're looking at worst case scenarios for his dynasty value, maybe he goes back to, North Carolina and he plays South Carolina, and goes and plays for the Panthers, right? And he's the number 1 receiver with Bryce Young. We like Bryce Young, but that's a pretty big downgrade from Burrow to Bryce Young. But I think it's more likely he ends up with a team like the Commanders The Commanders have over $100 million of cap space. The Commanders need another receiver opposite of Terry McLaurin, and they just go out and pay Higgins to be the highest paid receiver in the league. And now all of a sudden, Tee Higgins is catching passes from Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin on the other side. Like, that's really exciting. I just don't see many other situations out there where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm dropping him down. What if he goes and plays with Justin Herbert and it's Ladd McConkey and Tee Higgins playing together? I think that's great. I want to buy Tee Higgins now because no matter what happens, whether he resigns with the Bengals or he signs somewhere else, I think the hype is going to drive up his value. Buy him now at wide receiver 20 because in March he's going to be wide receiver 12.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Now, a player I know you're super high on, and you have been historically here, is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Dontavian Wicks. Tell us why you think he is going to be one of the biggest risers in terms of his overall dynasty value this offseason.
He had a frustrating year, right? Year 2 for him. The yardage went down. The touchdowns went up a little bit, but the same number of catches. I'm looking at the stat sheet now. 1, 2, 3, 4 games this year with 0 catches, right? But I do think this wide receiver core is going to get thinned out a little bit. And some of it's due to injury. Christian Watson suffered a torn ACL in week 18 with some other knee damage. I'm going to assume that we don't see him at all next year. Romeo Doubs is a free agent after the 2025 season. It just feels like the Packers need to start condensing their wide receiver core down. And Wicks is just the guy that I trust the most to get open consistently. Jaden Reed is a better player, conceding that to you, Kate. But I think Wicks is the more natural route runner. He's probably the one that I would be buying.
I think that's fair. And I do think that maybe condensing the wide receiver tree would also be helpful to Jordan Love, right? Like having fewer places to go with the football. And I think maybe that would be a plus in Jordan Love's favor if he has just more of a defined target tree and can build that rapport with a couple of wide receivers that are typically his first and second reads and leave the rest up to kind of more chance. I think that would be good for Jordan Love just from a mental standpoint. But Dontavian Wicks, I mean, I think time and time again, we've seen when he has been relied upon, and again, hasn't been consistent, but when he has been relied upon, he's looked really good. And I think he's passed the eyeball test. The efficiency metrics and PFF stable metrics back that up. So, yeah, I think investing in a group, like I have question marks about the Packers receiving core. I've said, like, maybe the answer for this receiving core is to do nothing with it. Like, but I think you're going to do something with it.
Just that's the wrong word. Just reduce the roles down so much. So it's not like Jaden Reed plays 55% of the snaps this week and 80 the next week. Like have an actual rotation or set group of receivers. And I think we're going to get it next year. I think it's probably going to be Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, and Dontavian Wicks. And those are probably just going to be the 3 receivers that are on the field all the time.
Yeah, I think that is a huge plus. And, sometimes if there are these uncertainties, if there's a good offense that like, man, if I could get some shares in this offense, if only I could understand the rotation more, like at the end of the day, the Packers, I think, are just going to, generally speaking, employ a good offense. I trust the coaching staff. I do know that Jordan Love is a guy that is unafraid to take risks in terms of, his passing ability. We've seen plenty of Brett Favre in him this year. Like there's some baller to the game. If we concentrate that target tree, that'd be great. But what I really like about Wicks is that he's not all that expensive. So like,
no, not at all.
If you swing and you miss,
not going to hurt you at all.
Not going to hurt you. Yeah.
Nope. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go follow the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here on Friday.